Hello, everybody. My name is Sydney Silver. I'm the Training and Education Coordinator here at Cove, and along with Jenna Hamper, the Career Pathways Coordinator, we're going to be organizing the local Floating Wind Challenge this year for 2025-2026. I first just wanted to say that Cove is doing this in partnership with William over at Offshore Wind for Kids, and the funding is being supported by the Nova Scotian Department of Natural Resources and Energy and the RBC Foundation. We wouldn't be able to do any of this without any of these wonderful people. So here's our agenda for the day. I'm going to do a brief introduction to Cove, talk briefly about what the Floating Wind Challenge is and some of the specifications for our local version. I'm not going to go too into depth because I want to leave that for William. Next, we're going to have William from Offshore Wind for Kids, who's going to talk about the global competition. He's the founder of the competition, so he knows everything about it. Then we're going to have Jerry Sheehan from SPN Offshore and Nova East Wind and Sarah Thomas from DP Energy to both give an introduction to the offshore wind industry, what it's going to mean and look like in Nova Scotia, and go over a few of the different types of floating wind turbines. And I ask that if anyone has any questions that you just leave them for the end. We're going to have some time left aside at the end for questions for any of the speakers today. So very quickly, Cove connects global innovation ecosystems, and we work to accelerate marine technology development to drive sustainability, resilience, and economic growth. What that means is that we are a not-for-profit who acts as an innovation hub for marine technology to help other organizations, people, researchers, etc., work on and grow their marine technology so that they can eventually bring that to commercialization or use it to do further research in the oceans. The great thing about Cove is that we have many different types of people that use our facility. It's a very diverse ecosystems. We have a mix of small and medium enterprises, startup companies, big multinational groups, clusters like the Ocean Supercluster, government organizations like Invest Nova Scotia and the Department of Natural Resources, partnerships like we have with Offshore Wind for Kids, and of course we have academic groups, both Dalhousie and NSCC will make use of our spaces for research and teaching. So overview for the Floating Wind Challenge. So first, why are we doing something like this in Nova Scotia? Right now, Nova Scotia sits on a very large continental shelf with large areas of shallow water that are actually ideal for both floating and fixed wind platforms. And Nova Scotia has some of the world's best, most consistent and fast wind speeds. So this makes us an opportune place to have a really large and flourishing offshore wind industry. And currently, the provincial and federal government have confirmed our first locations for offshore wind in Canada, and they will be in Nova Scotia. And they have a goal of producing 5 gigawatts energy by 2030, 2033 with some offshore wind farms. And finally, Nova Scotia itself has a goal of reaching 80% renewable energy by 2030. And a lot of that is going to be coming from green energy and offshore wind. So what is the Floating Wind Challenge? The very basics is that this is a build and design challenge to take a Vevor 500-watt turbine and build a floating structure for this turbine. And at the local challenge, we're going to be taking our structures and turbines to a spot called Rely on Newtack. They're an indoor testing pool that's right across the street from the NSCC Ivany campus and Dartmouth. And basically, we're going to be taking our turbines and structures there. They can simulate wind, waves, storms, etc. And you're going to be working together for your team to deploy and test your turbine on competition day to see how it can withstand high winds and waves. And we are going to have a panel of industry experts that are going to be there judging your structures and giving you feedback. When it comes to people that participate, any person at all levels of post-secondary academic institutions in Canada can participate, and that can be any range from undergrad, master's, PhD, diploma, or certificate students. We can have teams of up to 3 or up to 10 participants. And for our local challenge, we suggest that you have some sort of team supervisor that can be anywhere from an industry expert, professor, academic, instructor, etc. We also have our registration code here, and I will bring it up again at the end of the challenge. So what will you be judged on? There's 5 categories this year that our panel of industry experts will be judging you on. And it will be the same things that you will be judged on for the global competition. So you're going to be judged on power generation efficiency, structural integrity. So how well does your actual floating structure hold up in the waves, your anchors and mooring. One important note is that our test pool that we're using has concrete on the bottom of it, whereas if you happen to win and move on to the global competition, you will have to have anchorings and mooring for sand instead of concrete. You'll also be judged on transportation and installation. So how efficient are you and how long does it take for you to get your turbine from land into the water? And then finally, you will also be judged for your cost and efficiency at full scale. So how well do you use the budget that you're given, budget it out, what materials do you use compared to expenses, etc. Here's our timeline for the local challenge. So right now, registration is open and ongoing, and that is going to close at midnight on November 30th. Next, we'll be submitting your budgets. We will basically do this as you sign in or sign up. We will reach out to you, get you to create a budget for how much money that we were giving out to each team. After that, and we've approved your budget, we will send you your money for your structure. Then you will work together to actually build your structure, and this will be ongoing throughout the rest of the timeline. I will also be doing monthly check-ins with each team. So it'll be very quick, 15-minute check-ins once a month, just to make sure everything is going well and to check in if you need any extra advice, help, or mentors throughout the challenge. The next and really big step for both us and the global challenge is submitting your abstracts. We want those submitted both to us and to William on January 23rd. The next is test days. There's going to be 2 different test days that we're going to have at Rely on New Tech. These are going to be on weekends in January. So these are going to be opportunities for you to take what you have on your structures already and test them in the water a month or 2 before the actual challenge takes place. And then finally, the local competition is going to happen on the weekend of the February 21st to 23rd. Perfect. And this is a very brief overview of what your abstracts are going to look like. They have to be a 1-page A4 flyer. We want them to have a sketch or a 3D drawing of your floating structure at competition scale, not full scale, at competition scale. We also want them to have the details of participants. So that's your photos, names, your university or college, your study and program. We also want you to explain some of your standout features for your concept. We also want you to additionally send us a 3D model of your structure in a separate file, usually a step file. These are due on January 23rd, and this is the same date for the global challenge as well. Perfect. So I am now going to welcome William to do his talk about the global challenge and get more details about it. Thank you so much, William. Oh, I can't hear you. Perfect.
Thanks for inviting me. I tried sharing my screen. I'm not sure if it's live. Okay, great.
It is.
So first of all, maybe I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm the founder of Offshore Wind for Kids and also the Floating Wind Challenge. I've got a background in civil engineering. I've worked in the offshore wind industry for over a decade, but now I'm trying to inspire the next generation. With the Floating Wind Challenge, we really try to stimulate innovation in floating wind. And so you'll have to design and build your own floating wind support structure. There's the website floatingwindchallenge.com that we try to get all the information on. So please, if you have any questions, first look at the website, but then you can always send us an email. The email address is also at the bottom, or you can send an email to Sydney from Cove. We actually gave a webinar on the 22nd of September, a kickoff webinar. So that's also accessible if you want to look at this. Then I guess you have to sign in on LinkedIn, but then you'll be able to rewatch that kickoff webinar. And the slides, they're also available. I'll go through the slides and then I'll touch on some of the important points. Floating wind, as Sydney said, Sydney didn't say specifically, but floating wind is sort of ramping up, and we're just in a phase where we're going from demonstrator project to more commercial projects. So it's really ramping up, and so it's a really exciting time to be in floating wind. So we see a first project in the 500 megawatt scale. So that's the first commercial. And then we see a lot of demonstrator projects popping up globally. So just recently they launched some floaters in the south of France, but it's also happening across the globe. There's a few things that I can go through. So the background of the competition, some of the practical organization. Sydney covered some of this already, so I can skip that. The different criteria, and then I guess there can be some time for questions at the end. So this year will be the 5th edition of the Floating Wind Challenge. We've held it for like a couple of years already. Initially, it was based on the offshore wind for kids wind turbines, so toy wind turbines, but very quickly we decided to make it more challenging for the students. And right now we're going for Vevor wind turbines that have recently been upgraded from 400 watts to 500 watts. They're a diameter of 1.25 meters, so not too small. As actually you have to build a decent sized structure to support it. And we organize the competition in Europe. So we've held it at Scheveningen Beach 2023, then Plage Napoléon in the south of France, then in Zeebrugge. And we've also seen over the last years that the amount of participants is increasing. So I just heard from Cove that you have already 5 teams lined up. Maybe even more are coming because I also received some emails. And if you want to rewatch the after movies, they're on YouTube. They're also on the website or in here. But yeah, I don't quite have the time to go through it today. So who can participate? Students of all levels. I think Sydney covered this already. If you do have questions, you can always reach out to me. But so high school, undergraduate, graduate, and PhD level. Does have to be above 18 in terms of safety reasons, but basically students. The timeline for the competition. So we opened registrations on the 22nd of September. And the first major milestone is the abstract deadline. So I know you have a different set of timelines, but here are the official ones. Abstract deadline on the 21st of January. And then the selected teams for the competition, they will receive the wind turbine. So it's the same wind turbine for all the competing teams. And the top abstracts, so we do a selection, they qualify for an additional 1,000 euros for fabrication of their structure. The second major milestone is a report and structure deadline. So at that point, you have to submit all the files. We have to be able to judge whether your structure is safe and compliant. If we need to ask for any tweaks to your structure to make it more safe for the other participants. So that's on the 16th of May, and then we always try to give feedback 2 weeks later. In Canada, there will be a local competition, so that will be around February. At that point, it's still going to be quite cold, I think, in Canada. We also encourage you, and maybe this is not noted in the timeline of Sydney, but we will also encourage you to do a demonstration of your structure at the beach, because we actually want you to install it at the beach prior to installing it offshore at the final competition event, so you can run through your installation procedure and decommissioning procedure. So that's something we'll just double check with Sydney. And then on the week of the 6th to the 10th of July, 2026, we still have to finalize some of the details, but we will have the international competition event with 3 days. So 1 day of presentations and a barbecue, explaining the theoretical background of your structure. Then a competition day where you have to install it offshore and we can compare the different structures. And then on day 3 is a site visit and the prize ceremony. The location for the challenge, we're still discussing with some partners to see where exactly we will host it, but we will host it in Europe. So the exact location to be decided, but we always try to do it near an offshore wind hub so that we can also give you some interesting experiences with the site visits. So maybe you'll be able to see an offshore wind farm with a boat, or maybe you'll be able to see a construction yard. So the abstract, I think Sydney already covered. Important this year compared to last year is that you'll have to provide a 3D model of your structure. And we've actually recently put the 3D model on our website, so I'll just show it really quickly. It's available in our FAQ, frequently asked questions, and if you go to the turbine characteristics, so you'll see like a 3D model that you can just use, and then you don't have to worry too much about that part, and you can focus more on the support structure. So if you go to this website, you'll find the working document. So we may tweak it a little bit, but at least you have something to build upon and then build your whole structure below it. Then around May, you'll have to submit the report and a video of your structure and some additional documents, risk assessment, installation and decommissioning plan, and an overview of your structure costs. We will provide a little bit more detail around this later on in the competition, because this year we want to make sure that everyone does a risk assessment following the same procedures, and also follows the same template for the installation and decommissioning plan. But this information will follow later in the competition. And if you want to have some inspiration, so we've made the top 3 reports available. So if you click on one of these links, you will be taken to the reports from last year. And they can serve as really interesting inspiration to see, okay, what does a top performing report look like? What do I need to do to win the prizes? It's also available in the FAQ, frequently asked questions. Just checking where it is exactly. Here, some examples of the reports from the previous years, dating all the way back to 2023. So yeah, if you want to have some inspiration from previous teams, you can look through this. So the criteria, first of all, structure specifications. So it's a 500-watt wind turbine. The hub height is 1.2 meters above water level with some tolerance. And then water depth is minimum 1 meter and maximum 1.5 meters. The important thing here is that you have to do manual installation, so you cannot go much beyond this. And you're being evaluated along 5 criteria, which each get 20 points. So power generation, structural integrity, anchors and mooring, transport and installation, and materials and fabrication costs. But important here is that this year we will assign some bonus points within each of those criteria for innovation and sustainability. So one thing is, if you have some innovative ideas that contribute to improving the structural integrity or anchors and moorings, then you will get some bonus points, or similarly for sustainability. So we try to encourage you to also think a little bit on the innovative side and on the sustainable side. But yeah, that being said, if you do something like this, they have to have a positive impact on one of those criteria. I think that makes sense. So just focusing a little bit more on the reports. The first 3 items, these 3 you have to evaluate at competition scale, prototype scale. But item 4 and 5, we ask you to also evaluate at full scale in the report, just because we have to make sure that the concepts translate to full scale offshore wind turbines. And there are some reference documents that you can use for the full scale models. For the structure, we have a detailed table of how we evaluate the points. And so you can see, like, for example, for transport and installation, if you have fast installation sequence within tolerances, It'll get a score between 14 and 17. And like this, we add all of the points together and then decide the winner. We also do a little bit of monitoring of your structures. You don't have to worry about it too much for the abstract, but later on you'll have to see how exactly you do the wiring from the wind turbine to our monitoring box. So there are 3 AC cables that are sticking out of the wind turbine, and we'll have to attach a monitoring box to your tower. And then we have a radio signal that sends data to the central computer, and we will be able to compare the performance of all the wind turbines at the same time. So this is the setup from last year. We may update it slightly for this year, but this is the general setup that we use. And then ultimately you compete for one of 2 prizes. So 1,000 euros for the best report or 1,000 for the best structure. And we also assign some smaller prizes. Funding, I'm not going to go through. I think that wraps up my 15 minutes, and I'll leave it. I'll give it back to Sydney or the next speaker.
Perfect. Thank you so much, William. And just to clarify, a lot of what William talked about will be for the winner of our local challenge. Over those 1 or 2 days, we'll be doing the challenge. The winner of that will be the one to go to Europe, and that's the team that will be doing the written report and the extra deployment on the beach and the safety stuff with William. Perfect. So for our next speakers, we have Jerry Sheehan, who is a project development manager at SBM Offshore and Nova East Wind, and Sarah Thomas, a senior development manager at DP Energy, and they are going to be giving an overview of the offshore wind industry. Jerry, would you like me to share your slides, or would you want to do it from your end?
No, please go ahead.
Perfect. That's great. Just let me know when you want the next slide.
Yep. All
Whenever
right.
you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining, Sydney. Thanks for inviting us and having us be a part of your introduction to start the year off. At Nova East Wind, I don't know if some of you have heard of us already, but Nova East Wind is a partnership between DP Energy and SBM Offshore. Just to take a few seconds, DP Energy is a renewable energy developer. They develop offshore wind in multiple parts of the world, Australia, Ireland, UK, and Canada. And they also develop onshore wind and solar projects and have been involved in the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia. And from an SBM perspective, we would typically, 20 years ago, you would call us a typical oil and gas company. But we're leveraging our design, supply, and installation and offshore operations experience to build floating offshore wind in particular, and other technologies, adopting our oil and gas knowledge. And in Nova Scotia, I should really clarify France, we've built the very first offshore floating wind in France, not far from where William hosted the event 2 years ago, offshore Marseille. And we're part of the project developing Nova East Wind. Next slide, please. So just to give you some overview, I think you've heard Sydney mention a few of these pieces, and William maybe as well, but just to share maybe some of the global context of offshore wind. Today, there's over 70 gigawatts of offshore wind installed, and there's a massive potential growth worldwide. Now, we've seen some areas start to slow down a little bit, some other areas really continuing to accelerate, but the industry is definitely growing, even with some bumps in the road, with our neighbors to the south. Now, from a floating wind perspective, I think you've heard this number from William as well, around 500 megawatts of floating wind is kind of out there today. And what's exciting is that in the last year, there have been some very significant awards and some significant development opportunities. One of those is 750 megawatts of floating offshore wind was awarded to SBM in South Korea. And we know DP Energy is part of another project in Europe that was recently taken through the next step towards development as well. So offshore wind developments, if we look from a global context, most of the developments have occurred close to shore at first. It's a little cheaper to do it close to shore, but it's also significant to point out that a lot of the coasts for a lot of the countries that have developed offshore wind first have shallow waters. Now, in Nova Scotia, we're a little bit different. In Nova Scotia, we have deep water just off our coast. So if you're anywhere from 15 to 25 kilometers off the shore in Canada, eastern Canada, we have a really deep water trend. So that's really why we're focused on floating wind first for Nova Scotia, and that's really been one of the pieces that have made floating wind attractive for our development, and that's why we're sharing that story and continuing with that progress. And we see from other countries, now that some of the countries have developed their close to shore fixed wind, now they're moving into their deeper waters. And what the trend is, basically 80% of the world's wind resource is actually in those deeper waters further away from shore. So this is why floating wind is really a significant growth area. And it's good to point out, and just echoing what Sydney said, offshore wind is one of Nova Scotia's largest undeveloped natural resources. So we do have a significant resource, and we're going to show you a map here in a second. Next slide. So this is just a potential perspective from Marine Renewables Canada, and I love showing this map. When we compare Nova Scotia, just Nova Scotia, to countries or even regions of the world, just comparing the potential of Nova Scotia to the whole United Kingdom, for example, just Nova Scotia on our scale, we have almost, we've got 2/3 of what they have. The whole U.S. Atlantic, Nova Scotia almost has as much energy as potential as the U.S. Atlantic. What we see, and on the maps you can see the brighter red color. On eastern part of Nova Scotia, Cape Breton, and offshore to Sable Island, you see those significant colors, which is the significant wind areas, and that's really why we're seeing Nova Scotia move forward with parcels off of Cape Breton, off of the eastern shore, out to Sable Island. And it really shows that, we here in Nova Scotia are very fortunate to have this significant resource, and that's why so many companies like ours are interested in moving the industry forward here. And this is why we see some of our politicians being so positive about the energy and the industry as well. So it's responsible. It's not carbon intensive. It's green energy, and the potential is real. Next slide, Sydney. So just to talk a bit about the technology, on the left part of the image, you'll see some fixed wind. I like to show that for comparison. So at first, there's a single monopile all by itself, and then two fixed structures that are more of a lattice structure. So those will be installed in the shallower waters, anywhere from, say, 10 to maybe 50 meters of water, maybe upwards of 60 or 70 with some of the new technologies. But the focus for the conversation today is really the floating wind piece. The first floater is a semi-submersible with a spread mooring. The second one is a tension lag platform where the mooring lines go directly to the bottom. A lot of the structure is actually submerged under the water level, and the mooring lines are tight. And then the third one that you see there is a spar. So a spar is basically a slender cylinder with a submerged mooring. And each one of them have their advantages and disadvantages. Semi-submersibles are usually a little bit easier. Tension legs are quite good where you get under the waves, so you don't necessarily have a lot of wave action. And spars again are great for really deep water, um, and so each have their advantage and disadvantage, and we'll see some of this in videos near the end. And I think the next slide is for Sarah. There we go.
Oh, sorry, we should have switched these. Jerry, anchoring technology you talk more of, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the technologies and some challenges. Apologies there.
No, very good. So just on the anchoring side, just to show some of the different types of anchors. The suction caisson is the one on the left, showing that's one of the types of anchors that would be used for tension leg platforms. Basically, picture an upside down pop can and drive it into the ground. That gives you friction, and it gives you, an anchor that creates a suction so that you can pull. It gives you horizontal and vertical loading capabilities, and really it's a very secure type mooring, but it's more difficult. A traditional mooring would be a drag embedded an anchor, or something that looks like an anchor, where you set it in the ground, you pull on it, it drags itself into the dirt, into the bottom, and gives you that security. Then there's multi-piled, so those look like templates or other types of anchors that just have some, in many cases, steel driven through it. If you could picture a nailed anchor, where the pile or the multi-pile goes down into the ground to give you that extra friction and extra security, for the anchor. And then just a pure piled anchor again is another option. That's the tight option that's directly under the turbine on the right side. Again, that's usually a steel structure or a cylindrical tube that gets driven down into the ground to give you that nice fixed firm structure that again gives you horizontal and vertical loading capability. And the last one, which is the most simple, which is a lot of times what we do see in some of the technologies or some of the competitions, is a dead weight anchor. So basically, if you could picture a brick or something, but from an offshore wind perspective, these are normally very, very big steel structures. And what you'll see from a competition perspective is that a lot of folks would use steel or concrete or other types of anchors that just sit on the bottom or in the bottom of the beach, or in the case of testing in the pool, sit on the bottom of the pool. So that's the anchor technology overview, and over to Sarah.
Great, thanks, Jerry. Hi, everyone. So before I started working in renewables, I actually worked in shipbuilding. So a bit of experience with making sure things work in the ocean and are fairly stable as they do. So here you see another tension leg platform there on the left, a semi-submersible there in the middle. The lower right of the slide, that's actually a demo project at the University of Maine. It's also a semi-submersible technology from a floater concept. It's made out of concrete though instead of steel. It's an interesting concept, and like I said, it's actually in the water being demoed off the coast of Maine right now as a floating technology. And then above that is another example of semi-submersibles. Just an array of them. So as Jerry said, each of the technologies have their own pros and cons. There's actually another type of floater. It's called a barge floater. The barge is actually the easiest to install, and it's very it's a proven technology. It's basically like a ship barge just made to be stable. It has a lower roll and pitch, so if we look at that center photo there, that identifies the 6 different degrees of freedom that your floating turbine technology has, right? So you have your yaw, pitch, roll, but you also have heave, surge, and sway because you're out there in the ocean. So a barge is going to have a lower roll and pitch, especially if you compare it to a monopile or a spar type. And you've got room for maintenance, so that helps with stability. But barges are large, they have higher manufacturing costs, they've got a much larger seabed footprint, and are going to be subject to heave more so than some of your other technologies. A semi-submersible, which is 3 to 5 cylinders, or the main example, those are squares, cubes. They're all connected together in a triangular shape. They're linked by bracing or submerged pontoons, as you can see in both of those examples. They are stabilized throughout the water, and the columns provide your hydrostatic stability. They are also easy to install, have a proven technology, have been used. They're not dependent on water depth, and similar to the barge, they have a lower roll and pitch movement compared to some of the others. You do have a lower center of gravity, which helps with your stability, but can also have really high manufacturing costs. As Jerry said, it requires a spread mooring, so you have a larger seabed footprint. And similar, again, to the barge, you're subject to heavier heave movements just based on the characteristics of the semi-submersible. You have the spar, which we don't have an example in this slide, but it was on the last slide. That has a much smaller back, sorry. But your spar, it has a much smaller heave motion and is better used in water depths greater than 100 meters. Spars can be very difficult to tow, however. They do require a very deep dock or sheltered area, or a very large offshore crane for installation. So keep that in mind, as installation costs are one of the things you need to look at for the full scale. While they might have a smaller heave, they are going to have larger pitch and roll movements and challenges. And you are likely going to have some higher fatigue loading just due to the structure size. And without having any sort of real surface space, maintenance could be a challenge. And the final example is a tension leg platform, which TLPs are really good from a stability standpoint, have a much smaller heave and pitch, and they have a fairly small seabed footprint because your moorings are basically straight down. You don't have that spread out mooring. TLPs can work in all sorts of water depths, and they can be a much smaller structure, lighter structure. So from a cost and installation standpoint, those are good. You can have them assembled onshore or in a dry dock, and they have the best stability overall, which you'll probably see in a video here in a minute. But TLPs can require specialty installation vessels and have very high mooring loads because of that vertical mooring. So those are just quick pros and cons of your different technology types. Some things, next slide, please. So some things to keep in mind as you're working on your design and thinking things through. Don't forget where you have to scale up, and that's where you're thinking about installation and your costs at scale. For anything in the water, you need to remember what stability is. So center of gravity and center of buoyancy matter here. And that free body diagram, you've got 6 different forces, okay? Make sure you know what you're designing for, which is the turbine. So William gave the specifics, but you'll have the spec of your turbine. You need to know the weight and your center of gravity of your turbine. And that all factors into the design that you're working on. When you are working on anything this big, weight is king. Weight is so critical when you're trying to work on anything. So just keep that in mind. And you need to know what sort of wave motion you're designing for as well, because that factors into any sort of reserve buoyancy that you need to factor in. Ultimately, you're trying to balance strength, stability, and cost overall. That's your ultimate challenge. And so I've no doubt you guys can do that. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to highlight on the slide here, you do have a cable attached, or offshore wind turbines have a cable attached. There is dynamic loading associated with a cable like that. So keep that in mind. Okay. Next slide. Just real quickly, Nova Scotia, when offshore wind takes off here, there's quite a bit of work that will happen in Nova Scotia. A lot of design, development work from studies, geotechnical, all of that. When you build, there's a lot of work that will happen in the ports here in Nova Scotia, which is great. And then, these are operating for 30 plus years. So you have regularly scheduled maintenance, ongoing data collection, and then decommissioning at the end of life. So, okay, next slide, please. Jerry?
Yeah, so hopefully the video will play, but maybe Sydney, just give me 1 second before you hit play. Oh, the last couple of years, I've been fortunate enough to be a judge with Sydney and the team at Cove and some other industry professionals as well. And what I wanted to do today is just show you the video, or one of the videos from last year, so you can see the different types of structures. The first one on the left, that's, I'll say, closest to the wall, that was kind of a mixture unit. It was kind of a mixture between a tension leg platform and a semi-submersible with additional buoyancy. The turbine that's closest to the left-hand part of your screen right now is the TLP, the tension leg platform. And then the one you can't see on the screen yet, but you'll see it in a second, the one that'll be on the far right-hand side, that's a semi-submersible. And what's happening is the wave ball is creating waves in the pool, and you're going to see how the turbines and how the structures really respond in the pool. And I think, I'm not sure, last year we showed that, and I think it'll be good to learn from the previous years. We'll see things, move forward with the designs and the ideas, and hopefully this will give you an opportunity to see how things work and really demystify what happens in that wave pool. So Sydney, maybe hit play and we'll show everyone what happened last year. On my screen it's a little bit choppy, but hopefully it'll come around. Now keep in mind, this may look scary. Some of them are moving quite a bit. If you had to scale this up, this would be like being in a hurricane. Like, these are massive waves for what these structures are really should take and what they'd be designed to take. So it's quite violent from a wave perspective, but it really shows how good of a job the teams did last year at building their structures for such a significant wave event and wind as well. And don't mind that the turbines aren't spinning right now. That wasn't the goal during this video. It was more about, let's demonstrate how things go in a wave. And I think this is something, I mean, Sydney, feel free to, I don't know if we can share this with them or not, but it'll be good for everyone to maybe see this again and do some analysis. And I think what we've seen, you see some of the advantages and the challenges with some of the technologies. Obviously, if your structure is mostly below the water level, it doesn't get impacted by waves a little more. But you'll also see that, maybe your structure needs to be wider or longer, or, how it should change or how it could change, as designs progress and as ideas progress as well. So
am also going to hop in and say that if anyone does want to see any of the videos from last year, have me send them to them. We can certainly make that happen for you. Just let me know. Would we like the next slide, Jerry?
Yes, please.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Is that what we want? Yeah.
Yeah, if we have time, we can show this. So we had this visualization made to really share with industry professionals at some of the conferences we go to, if we're meeting with fishers or other community members. But it really shows some of the visuals on what a scaled up offshore wind project could look like for Nova Scotia. So it gives some good visuals. It shows how floating wind is usually built on land. So no different than how your teams will build your structures on land, then take them to the water, then tow them to the site. So this kind of gives you a full scale view. Yeah, go ahead. If we have time, show it. Yeah. There's normally sound, but that's okay. If it doesn't have the sound today, that's completely fine.
There is sound on my end. I'm not sure no one else can hear it.
No. So I'll talk through it. This was just a visualization that we shared of, how turbines would be manufactured on shore, kind of almost in an assembly line type process. Oh,
Oh.
that jumped. It might have jumped to the next. Yeah, that jumped to the next video, Sydney. All right. So here we're showing how a large crane would be used to help build the structures, and then a large ring crane will be used to actually install the turbine on top of the structures once they're floating. This just shows what some of the structures would look like being stored and how some of the components would be stored. Integration of the turbine at shore. So a lot of the work with floating wind actually happens at shore, the same as it'll happen with your teams. And then you put it together, and then you put it in the ocean and tow it to its final site. So, the process that you'll follow as participants really does follow how companies do it in practical. And the next one just shows that shows really the underwater view. So again, we like showing this structure. This is SBM's TLP. It shows how it's anchored. It shows how a crew transport vessel would actually bring people to site. How the crews would climb up the ladder to access the maintenance platform. And again, this is real. Like this is our actual design, and we had a Nova Scotia company make this wonderful animation and visualization so we could share it with the community. And I think what you'll see in a few seconds, if it continues to play, is that then we get kind of a drone image. This just shows how the power cables would come down the side of the structure and how they would go to the bottom of the ocean. So in a few seconds, we'll see kind of the drone view. And this shows really what an offshore wind farm installation would kind of look like. These turbines, from a visual, they look like they're kind of close, but really that's about 2 kilometers distance between the turbines. So it's a fairly significant distance. And again, this just shows how people would actually, walk to work basically. How they would get there, how they'd be able to access the facility to do their maintenance, other inspection activities. we'll kind of get the bird's eye view here in a second to really show you what a field could look like offshore Nova Scotia. And again, you're not seeing land, and in Nova Scotia, all the parcels that the government recently announced are all no closer than 20 kilometers to shore. And those, basically, you won't see them from shore. And if you did, they would be the size of maybe an ant on the horizon. So it'll be very, very small. I think that's it for slides.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jerry and Sarah. We really, really appreciate your time. During Q&A, I'm just going to quickly bring up our registration QR code again. Nope. Give me one moment. But while I'm getting this set up, if anyone has any questions, please, for me, William, or Sarah or Jerry, please feel free to put them in the chat. Any questions at all? And if you also have any extra questions too, that you can't think of any right now, please feel free to contact us at my email or at our workforce development email right here as well. Give it about one more minute. Don't see any questions popping up, so I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for attending. Once again, please feel free to email us at our workforce email if you have any further questions. I can also send the slides as well if anyone is interested. And thank you again so much, William, Jerry, and Sarah, for coming in and sharing all of your knowledge about the industry and the challenge. We really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you, and good luck to everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
William. Thank you.